The hearing that we are going to have this morning, I just wanted to indicate, is a joint informational hearing between the Senate and the House regarding Senate File 2882, which is the vehicle title and registration system with the acronym of VITRIS. It's a little bit crowded here this morning, and it is the room that we have available to us given all of the various conference committees that are going on today. I do want to welcome Chair Hornstein and all of the members of the House Transportation Committee over to the Senate. I'm very happy to see you, and I am really quite anxious to move forward this morning with our agenda. Preliminarily, I would indicate that we've got staff that we are going to have walk through the bill itself, or I should say the amendment actually, that we have in your packets. I'd also indicate there is a summary in your packet, but I want to move through a staff overview at a very high level, and I want to try and leave as much time as possible for Mr. King's presentation, and more importantly, any questions that members of either the House or the Senate may have for him following his presentation. We do have a hard stop at 10 o'clock because we have the Senate is in session. Chair Hornstein, is the House in session also at 10?
A little later. I think we're a little later than that, but we are in session.
All right. So if members, if you would hold your questions until Mr. King is completed with his presentation, I would really appreciate it. But we have Mr. Howe and Mr. Larson. Where are you going to be seated? Apparently over in the audience. Just signal them if you have a question, and they will bring a list to me after Mr. King's presentation, and we will save as much time as we possibly can to get to member questions. I think that's really important. With that, I have no further preliminary comments. Chair Hornstein, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, just thank you, Mr. Chair, for helping to arrange this, and I think it's really important that we present these bills and get some comments from the public and other stakeholders. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, if we could have staff come to the testifying table, and believe me, members, I am not trying to cut staff off for my full presentation, but I'm really anxious to hear what Mr. King has to say. So why don't we begin with Ms. Stengel, if you would give us a broad overview of the policy provisions of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Lexi Stengel. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Senate Counsel, and I think actually Ms. Boyd is going to start with the financial part of the amendment.
Ms. Boyd. Little mental bite.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you. I'm Krista Boyd, Senate Fiscal Analyst. We're looking at the 2882A5 document. Just very briefly, I'm not going to go through section by section, but just give you an overview of the financial aspects of this amendment. There are a number of fees throughout. One of them is the technology surcharge, and this is to replace a surcharge that expired in 2016. This replaces that surcharge at $225, and this revenue goes into the Driver and Vehicle Services Technology account, and that revenue is appropriated to the Commissioner only for the purposes of development and deployment of the vehicle registration system. So those, I'm not going to go through section by section, so I'll just give you an overview. Those are the tech fees. They're in several sections throughout the language. Also, there are fees on license plates and driver's licenses in varying amounts. Those fees lower after a period, after fiscal year 22. Those fees go down. And those go into the driver services and vehicle services operating accounts at DVS, and they're used to fund operations of the division. And then finally, Oh, there's one other piece, and I don't remember what page it's on. There is an increase to the fee charged on bulk data sales for driver records and licenses, vehicles, and that fee is increased from 1 cent to 2 cents, and that amount goes into the that fee increase goes into the Driver and Vehicle Services Technology account as well to fund the system. And then on the, on the next to last page, on page 30, there is a list of appropriations in the bill to fund the system. There is general fund appropriations on line 30.13 and 30.17 to fund respectively the development of the package software system for vehicle registration and the completion of the driver's license system. There are appropriations on 30.20 and 30.24, and these are to fund additional staffing at DVS to support operations there. And then there are appropriations on line 30.28 to the legislative auditor, and this is from the Data Security Account and Special Revenue Fund, and this is to fund quarterly reviews and final audit of the new system. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Ms. Stengel.
Ms. Stengel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I also will not go through section by section. There are several pieces here relating to sort of oversight of the decommissioning of MNLARS and the implementation of VTRS. One of those provisions is that in 2018 there was an IT auditor position created in the OLA. That position is being amended, so it now will continually oversee MNLARS as it finishes up and VTRS as it is implemented. There is also in 2018, the MNLARS Steering Committee was created. This bill dissolves that committee and turns it into the new Driver and Vehicle System Oversight Committee. And that committee has the same membership as the MNLARS Steering Committee. It's legislators, the chair and ranking minority member, and finance or Ways and Means chair. And those are the 6 members, 6 voting members of the committee. The committee is set up to oversee the implementation of VTRS, the decommissioning of MNLARS, and the driver's license system sort of all together. There are several reporting requirements. The commissioners of MN.IT and DPS report quarterly. The vendor that provides VTRS will also provide quarterly reports to the committee, and stakeholders are encouraged to submit quarterly reports. The committee has a few other duties, such as reviewing fees and surcharges that are implemented under this act and recommending to the legislature, and holding a public meeting to review the contract negotiations for the new system. And this committee will expire 6 months after the new system is fully implemented. Section 35 of the bill on page 26 is where we talk in detail about the vehicle title and registration system. This section allows the Commissioner of Public Safety to use an expedited procurement process to get a contract in place with a vendor early this summer to begin work. You'll see on page 27, there's a provision there about MNLARS freeze. The deficiency funding that was provided earlier this session essentially purchased the final update to MNLARS, which is update 1.16, which will be released in June. After that update, MNLARS will essentially be frozen and maintained at that level with minimal staff there to fix bugs and make sure the system continues to run until the new system is in place. There are some other provisions there that I'll leave to your good reading. Self-service options. The Commissioner of Public Safety has to look at ways that self-service and on-the-spot fulfillment can be provided in the driver and vehicle systems. And then finally on page 28, there's a vehicle registration task force. That is a group that will get together during this interim to study various methods of vehicle registration. And Mr. Chair and members, I'll end there.
Thank you, Ms. Stengel. Mr. Burris, I would like to move to Mr. King at this point, unless you have something specific. Okay, thank you, Mr. Burris. With that, if Mr. King, if you would come to the testifying table too. Ms. Albus, you are more than welcome to join him. Please come to the table with him. Members, this is Mr. Rick King. He is the chairman of the expert review panel that the governor appointed to try and help us out of this this problem, and with him is Ms. Amy Albus. She is one of the members of that expert review team. I'd like to welcome both of you to the joint session of the Transportation Committee for purposes of hearing what you folks have got to say about this issue. I would indicate that this is somewhat unusual that we have a joint hearing like this, and it is done in an effort to save time and also so that you don't have to present yourselves in two separate hearings. Before we move forward, Chair Hornstein, is there anything that you want to add, or should we just go to the testifiers?
I think we should just go to the testifiers and then maybe straight into member questions after that.
Very good. Thank you, Chair Hornstein. Mr. King, if you would, we are recording this so that both of you know this, and so it's important that for purposes of the recording, we have you identified on the record as to who is testifying, and then as questions go back and forth between the two of us, I have to recognize you so that on the recording it's known who is talking. Mr. King, if you would identify yourself for the record, and the preliminary question that I have for you is if you would identify those who were on the expert review team with you, give us some idea of the background of the various team members so that we can understand why we should, for lack of a better way to put it, why should we rely on what your recommendations are? Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you don't mind, I'd also, after I identify our team and talk about it, I have a brief statement for everybody, and then I'd be glad to entertain any of the questions as you see fit.
Please proceed.
Thank you. My name is Rick King. By day, I'm the Executive Vice President of Operations at Thomson Reuters in Eagan. From my background, I've been there for 20 years. I've been the Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer of that company, and several going back 30 years time. So I've been at many different companies in that type of role. So this is familiar territory, building software, buying software, that type of thing for myself. Next to me is Amy Albus. Amy works at Thomson Reuters also. She's an attorney. She works in change management and large project and program implementation. She was the master author of many of the words in the report. We technology people aren't always the best authors of things, so we got somebody who's a really good writer. But a big part of this was also the type of change that is brought forward with the type of software that gets put out. So that's a very important characteristic that she brought to the table. The third person, his name is Teresa Wise. Teresa is former CTO, CIO of Delta Airlines, and before that, Northwest Airlines. As you might imagine, the airlines are used to large systems, large implementations. Under Teresa's auspices and leadership, the merger of the Delta systems and the Northwest systems were done. And that's one of the few airlines that actually did that flawlessly and effectively. Normally, you read about those kind of combinations as a blip of some sort. So she brought a huge expertise to this group. The fourth person's name is MN.IT. Mick is a former chief architect of Lawson and some other software companies, and he retired from Thomson Reuters as a chief architect. He's a bits and bytes guy, programmer, the kind of architect that can look at systems, do deep dives into technology, and he brought that expertise to the table. Mr. Chair, that's the four people that did the MNLARS independent expert review.
Thank you, Mr. King. And would it be fair, Mr. King, for the members of this joint committee to assume that you and your team have reviewed the A5 amendment, which is in their packets, and that the A5 amendment reflects the recommendations of the expert review team that you have just outlined?
Mr. Chair, the A5 amendment does indeed represent the views of our independent expert review. We worked extensively with all staff on the House and the Senate side, and as well as the governor's staff, to get all of the requisite elements in there and to simplify some of the things that were needed to be taken care of, make sure that the provisions covered us through the implementation period. So in total, yes, it does represent what we recommended in our independent review.
Thank you, Mr. King. And with that, then, I would ask that you explain to the members of this joint committee the basis for your recommendations. And I think that primarily I would ask that you hit on the issues of the policy that is in the A5, that you talk about your recommendations regarding the funding aspect of it. I think that we have to have a discussion on the staffing recommendations that you have given, and the team's recommendation for pivoting from the MNLARS system that was being developed to recommending that we turn to a package software program. Mr. King, if you would do that for us, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Again, Chairman Newman and Hornstein and ranking members Dibble, Torkelson, and members of both committees, thank you for having us here today. What I want to do is a little recap of the expert review team's report, which will answer some of the questions that have been posed to us. And this report was released on May 9th. I think most of you probably have seen it by now. First, a little history. The governor created the Blue Ribbon Council on IT by an executive order number 1902 on February 6, 2019, and asked me to be the chair of that. On March 5th, the legislature passed and the governor signed a bill providing emergency funding for the balance of fiscal year 19 for MNLARS, with part of that bill requiring an independent expert review of MNLARS to be chaired by the Blue Ribbon Council chairman, using a small team named by that person, me, and in order to report out by May 1st, which we did, in order for the legislature to have time to digest the report and take the necessary action. I'm actually delighted that we're here talking about a document that has the recommended action in it, so I appreciate that. Starting on March 5th, the review team ran an intensive process with over 50 meetings with various stakeholders. We talked to 19 deputy registrars. We visited 2 offices in person, not just to listen to them, but watch the counter transactions in the office with the citizens. We also spoke with the Auto Dealers Association, the Insurance Association, the Auto Salvage Group, and more. We met with internal teams at MN.IT, DPS, DVS, and the OLA. Our process included talking to one of the vendors who responded to the state-issued RFI to hear about the maturity of the package software solutions. We also spoke to 4 states that used that particular vendor's package software solution to help us gauge the maturity of the solution and of the market. We made our recommendation, which was to move to a package software solution. Paired with this recommendation were 2 other important recommendations. First, continue MNLARS until version 1.16 is released in June and then freeze it. That puts MNLARS into a maintenance mode where the only work done is for bug fixes. This will require a freeze on the implementation of new statutes over that time as well. Second, figure out a way to expedite the procurement and implementation of a package software solution to minimize the time until the selected package is live. The review team believed our recommendations are the best and still does believe our recommendations are the best go-forward plan for the state and provide the most future-proofing possible. We can discuss that some more with your questions. While much good has been done since the failed MNLARS release of July 2017, the path going forward for an internal build of the software is risky. We believe it would be much less risky to select a package software solution, particularly one that is currently in use in at least 10 other states. The subject matter experts at such vendors are skilled at how other states register their vehicles, and this expertise would be brought to bear in selected package software solutions. The review team believes that with rapid procurement and selection, a vendor could have a system running and replacing the MNLARS software in 16 months. It would then take approximately 10 more months to replace the rest of the mainframe software that is still operating alongside of MNLARS today. We note the following as important points. We expect this to cost more in the upcoming biennium as we transition, while at the same time believing it will better position the state for the future. Secondly, DPS must be the owner of this application. MN.IT must play a strong role in assisting DPS making this successful. The recommendation to procure a package software solution will force yet another change on the deputy registrars and employees of DVS working to support them. While the review team is sensitive to this challenge, it strongly believes the change is worthwhile and that if the project is staffed and managed appropriately, DPS can minimize the impact. The review team believes its report details the best approach going forward. Since the report was released, the review team has worked with the House, the Senate, DPS, MN.IT, and the Governor's Office to help turn the recommendations in the report into the action that you're looking at today. The result, which prescribes the policy changes and fiscal requirements to implement the key recommendations of the review team, include setting up an open but accelerated purchasing process to obtain a license to a package software solution to do the vehicle titling and registration, appropriating necessary funds to obtain the package software solution, ensuring adequate staff to successfully implement the package software solution, retiring MNLARS and the legacy systems once the new package is implemented, and ensuring accountability through timely reporting and clear lines of responsibility. In closing, we would recommend the passage of the A5 as discussed here earlier, and whatever companion bills are required, and the signature by the governor as soon as possible to get the process started. We stand by to support you and the state in whatever way we can. I'm happy to address questions. Mr. Chair, if you want me to go to any of those that you previously mentioned, please just say and I will go into them.
Thank you, Mr. King. I think preliminarily it would be pretty important to all of us if you could spend a little bit of time talking about the cost and the difference in the cost between MNLARS and Vitris. And the staffing issues is also something that is going to be very important to us. If you could spend a little bit of time on that. Then I think what I'll do is I'll go to member questions. I don't know if there are questions, but I anticipate there will be. Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think as in the report, maybe the largest part of the fiscal statement to make is that the state would either need to continue with MNLARS or select a package solution as we have discussed. We obviously have made our recommendation to you. Over the biennium, it will cost approximately $20 million more to implement the package solution than it would to implement MNLARS, the completion of MNLARS. So at the largest point, that's the fiscal, I think, the fiscal kind of decision, because you must actually have one of those two packages going forward. So why does it cost more? Might be the next question. Clearly, for the period of time during the implementation, which would be the first 16 months, then that follow-up 10 months. During the first 16 months, you have two systems running. You're implementing the new package software solution. You have staff from DVS and some from MN.IT, but mostly DVS staff that are working on the implementation of that new system along with the third-party, selected third-party vendor. At the same time, you have the running of the current MNLARS system, which requires its hardware, its software to be taken care of. The only thing that you've really slowed down is the development on the MNLARS system. So you're maintaining it to fix bugs, but you're still running it normally we call that period of time where both systems are running the bubble period. You've got a bubble in the cost because you're actually implementing a system and running a system. Once that 16-month period is over, and then mostly the remainder part of that biennium, that would be the one upcoming, you have about 2 months that go into the future biennium. Then you start streaming off the costs of MNLARS. You can retire the hardware, you can shut it down, you stop paying for it, you stop the bug fixing on the software, you start getting into a normal operating mode. So that is when you get into the details of the budget where you see the overlay of more people and the funding that comes out of some of the special funds going into the payments for both the software and the people that are making that happen. Once that's complete, and I think we've identified the completion time for the purpose of the people to be 6 months after the time that it's in to allow for a stability period. You then have the people that were on the project starting to stream off onto a normal operate routine. And then the funding goes back to the normal funding.
And Mr. King, the staffing issue, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The recommendation that came forward between the department, DPS, and the governor called for approximately 187 staff members to be brought in for vehicle services and driver services staff. That replaces a lot of the staff that was funded during the emergency funding. So we took a look at that and we dialed down the recommendation of that, and it should be in some of the packets, but we subtracted 49 of those individuals in the title and registration issuing staff and in the public information center staff. Now again, those people then that were left in that would be funded through the plate and the license fee fund, and then the people that I just talked about subtracting would come out once the project is implemented, and there we recommended the sunsetting of a portion of that fund and those individuals for that. There was also staffing requirements during the implementation of the new system, which are funded by the technology side, technology fund, of which there's, I think the fiscal person described how that was being added to. And those people are the people in DVS that are specifically assigned to be the business analysts and help implement the new system. Those are the major portions of the staffing that we spent the most time discussing. We reviewed those, as I said, with all the staff and feel like we've nudged back quite a bit on the request, yet I think we've met what I think will be the metrics over time that have been put up for DVS to meet in terms of call center response, their response on things from driver's license exams to handicap stickers and things like that that have been slower than normal since the beginning of the implementation of MNLARS, as well as the work on the fast driver's license system.
Thank you, Mr. King. At this point, we will go to member questions, beginning with Chair Hornstein. Do you have any specific questions that you would like to ask? You get the first bite out of the apple.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. King, thank you. You have gone well above and beyond the call of duty in terms of your work, both during the time of the research in the commission and the reporting, and then all the work you've done since then and helping develop the legislation, being available to all of us. It's very, very appreciated, especially because you do have your day job. So I know you touched on this at the end of your testimony, but I am interested in exploring a little bit more of the staffing questions, particularly as it comes to the Public Information Center at DVS. We have seen very significant progress because of the increased staffing in terms of wait times and the like. And so it is a bit concerning to see that disappear. And I'm interested to know a little bit more your thinking in terms of those staff reductions, because I do have concerns about that.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Hornstein, for those kind remarks. We're happy to help. Relative to the PIC, or the Public Information Center, the request was for 65 people, and we viewed the 65 people as important at this point in time while we're still in a transition. We do believe that the allocation of the number of people in the emergency funding and then going into the beginning is still resolving some of the backlog. So we felt that was pretty important. And then as you go into the transition of the actual into the actual new system, we also see probably a peak of those kind of calls coming in there. However, once that new system is stable, we just don't see the same level of demand. And that was the reason that we then looked at how those people would stream off, that staffing would stream off once that happened. So we took 30 people away from that staffing, which was at 65, but that's at the end of the implementation period plus 6 months. So at that point, we will have gotten through all the MNLARS backlogged information and all those calls. We will have dealt with the peak period of the new system implementation, and we should be in a normal running and operating mode. So it is our opinion that that staff can come back and that there isn't that much risk to that. You're quite right that the responsiveness has increased at the conclusion of the emergency funding, so we were very cognizant of that. We looked at their numbers. We did discuss this with DVS or DPS, and while I'm not saying they would agree with us, because we definitely challenged them, I think they have what is a workable plan in our opinion.
Chair Hornstein.
Oh, thank you, and I think it is something to continue to explore in terms of the staffing levels. And again, I do worry. I trust and hope that once the system is up and running, there'll be less of a need. But we found in the past that those staff have been helpful. So we'll continue to discuss this and explore it together. But I again appreciate your answer and your work.
The House is our guest, so I am going to alternate between House and Senate questions. And so the first representative with a question is Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess the question I have a concern and a question. One is the concern is I'm reading the bill and I'm reading the brief here. We're going to stand down MNLARS. It is a time certain for standing that down. And I guess coming out of the OLA report from with the problems that we had with MNLARS, one of the issues they had was they stood down the system that was prior to it and had no way to go back to it in case there was mistakes with the new system. And so I have concerns with that about having a time certain of standing it down with no guarantee. I mean, there's assurances that it's going to work better. This is a system where we're modifying a system that's already out there and being used elsewhere, but still, I have concerns with that of standing it down before we know that it's up and running, because if we did have to go back, we may not be able to do that, and that was a concern. It's a concern I have. The other concern I have, and I guess this is a question, one of the other things from the OLA report was that one of the initial problems, what they started out with, is we didn't do fix the business functions. And some of our laws that we have counteract each other or contradict each other, which made it difficult to write the system in the first place. And I know that started way back in the beginning when when Plenty was governor. So that's when this started. So it's a matter of, are we going to fix those things ourselves first and make sure that that's done before we start writing this system or going to this new system, or are we going to make that same mistake again? I guess that's the question I have.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, two great questions. Thank you very much. you are right that in 2017, the lack of ability to fall back probably created the most issues with MNLARS going forward. So I think that's a terrific point. What we feel here is that we will maintain MNLARS. MNLARS is roughly operational. According to most of the deputy registrars, they can do the typical transactions that are brought to them. It's the more complex ones that they need help from the call center or from DVS. So we feel like we will be okay freezing that. Freezing it doesn't mean that we're going to be decommissioning it. We don't decommission it until we have the new one implemented. So I think the fallback would be that you could fall back and you are using MNLARS until 6 months after the implementation of the new system, which is the reason also that you have that period of time there. To the second question about the business functions, and I think that is quite right as well. I would reorient our thinking, though, a little bit to this. In a package solution, it is our belief that you should take that package solution and use it, and then as you're implementing it, determine which of the laws need to be changed in order to successfully use what's already there. Make it the rare exception. And you'll see in the bill there's a process for the exceptions to be made by commissioners and reported to this oversight committee, that they should be quite rare. We need to adopt the way the systems are being, the system is being used. If that takes some work in terms of legislation to change some things, that would be what that group that was described in the policy matter would get to, the drivers and vehicle rules, that would be due to report what would need to be changed in the system by January of 2020. That way, at the beginning of the next session, you could have a list of things that were thought, these need to be changed because we can't work around them with the package solution. And if we change them, we can conform to the package solution. I will just say that in the 4 states that we've talked to that used a package solution, they would underscore the approach of using it as much as possible, and found that it conformed and was able to, with minimal work by the vendor, be tuned to the use. The states we talked to, by the way, had people in the private sector or the public sector that were quite similar to deputy registrars, although they didn't call them that. So the functions were similar to Minnesota, much more so than maybe we thought they might be. So we have comfort that the packages like that will, out of the box, do most of what the state needs. Then we need to decide, do we really want to customize or do we want to change the statute? And I think the first step should be, let's see what it takes to change the statute, and then failing that, we can ask the software vendor to add something. That would be our approach.
Representative Nelson does have a follow-up question. Yeah. I'm going to grant that, but I would ask members, we have a growing list of colleagues that want to weigh in on this. So we'll have a follow-up question briefly so that we can be fair to our colleagues. Representative Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess to my concern is, like I said, there's a time certain in the bill here in the DE amendment on 28.2 of 2021 to decommission both MNLARS and the legacy system. So I guess that's where my concern comes from, that having a time certain in the bill, that could be a target date, but if we should have some wiggle room in there in case something happens where, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen as quickly as we think it's going to happen, that we have a fallback so we're not doing the same thing we did last time and having another MNLARS situation.
Well, Representative Nelson, hopefully, if we follow Mr. King's recommendation, that is not going to happen. He has, I think, stated specific reasons why the dates are being picked, and he feels that he can meet them. I guess with that, thank you for the questions and the observation, Representative. I think we will move on. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. King and Ms. Albus, and to the other members of the panel, I really do want to echo the appreciation for the work that you have put in on this obviously important but challenging issue that we've been facing. I want to Representative Nelson's line of questioning is related to the big question I have on the recommendation to use an existing software package as a solution. And as context, and having looked at this for a while, one of the things that we have heard repeatedly is that in the case of the driver's side, driver's licenses, because of so many federal regulations, there is a lot of consistency among all the states, and therefore it is much easier to standardize how that side of it gets addressed and handled. On the other hand, when you look at vehicle registration, there is no such uniformity, and every single state has their own philosophy and their own it's a local taxation project ultimately, and it is incredibly unique. 3M is in my district, and I had a conversation with them a couple years ago. They actually used to have a package that did this, and they got out of this business because they found there were no real efficiencies in doing it because it was all so unique and it was hard to provide that kind of package. And so my concern is, and I appreciate you've already addressed this to a degree in talking about the other states that have used this one and that they have the deputy registrars, but I am concerned, and I'm wondering if you have any, what else you can add to this conversation. It's great that it can work with the functions on the deputy registrar's side, but in so many ways, Minnesota is a local control state, and as you talk about eventually changing statute, yes, there are probably some ways we can streamline some of this stuff, but is this really, have you guys looked at the different options and found that there are things out there that will work relatively seamlessly with the system that Minnesota has so that that this will succeed?
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, again, great question. And obviously, a company like 3M is capable of putting their mind to something and doing it, but whether they want to do it economically and want to be in that kind of software business is the question. I know if it were my company's choice, I would not do this. This would not be in our core expertise. So it's not surprising to me that they actually got out of it. What we are doing here is looking for a package, and we have talked to one of the package providers enough to know how they approach this, how they generalize it, and then how they do certain levels of customization if it's really necessary. Oftentimes, if a state requests something, the way that a packaged software solution company would look at it is any other state going to want that ultimately, and is it really a system enhancement? And if it is, we'll build it into the core. Then it's available to all the states that they serve. So that's how the features grow. In talking to the states, we talked to one of the first states that used this particular package. And we talked to the last state that had just implemented it. There's a couple in implementation as we speak as well, which ups the number a bit. But each of them was very pleased with the way the software solved the problem that they had. And to your point, some of them had vehicle registration under their tax department. Some of them had it under their public safety department. License and vehicle were in different departments in some of the states, and they all wanted, after using the particular package, to move the drivers or the vehicle to the same package. They saw the wisdom of doing that. We talked through what they did relative to requirements, standardization, and those types of things, and we cleaned input. One state started from scratch, took 2 years to go back to the requirement level. To the representative's point, to just begin from step one. They were earlier in the implementation of the package software solution in terms of the number that were installed at that point. I think we're at a point where it's a pretty robust number of states. It covers a wide variety of these different issues, which you characterize different and more complicated, or at least different, more dissimilar than the driver's side, so acknowledged on that. But we still see these package software solution providers being able to meet the needs and address them in a standard way. And each state that they do, and 2 are about to be launched by this one vendor, and then another one is in implementation. The more they do, the less customization is even thought of. You've got a more robust core system. I believe we're covered with that, and that was, I think, without our comfort in the area that you asked, we could not have recommended that we move from MNLARS. We had to be confident that a package software solution wasn't going to get us into a similar situation.
Representative Elkins. Yeah, you have to turn your mic on. Thank you.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. I spent some time last week with representatives of MN.IT and DPS going through provisions in our omnibus bill and identifying limitations in MNLARS right now that might get in the way during this interim period. So I heard very loud and clear that we basically want to freeze MNLARS and put it into a maintenance mode, and I completely understand and agree with that. But I think the members need to understand that that means that there are some limitations that we will have to live within in terms of what we can do in the interim because of that freeze. Also, very basic one, in order to implement the tech fees, for example, we do have to allow MN.IT and DPS to do some programming because the technology fee that had existed before actually expired before MNLARS went live, and therefore the ability to collect a tech fee is not built into MNLARS, and that one item will cost about $250,000. So I think we need some clear guidance from you, I think, that, yeah, it'll be okay to spend, $250,000, $300,000 on items within MNLARS just that we need in order to make the transition. Because just changing a rate, MN.IT has gotten so gun-shy about regression testing that they do about $25,000 worth of regression testing every time we change a rate.
Mr. King.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Understand that, and let me talk a little bit about it. I think the A5 has language in the freeze that says that there has to be some work done on the fees. There are fees, as you mentioned in there. The tech fees have to be taken care of, and there's plate and license fee proposed changes as well. Yep. So we've tried to accommodate that. So the idea is get those done and then freeze it. I will point out that one of the things we are going to get by here is that when you authorize a new plate, and you see numerous of those plates in the beginning of the A5, it's way too expensive in MNLARS to add a plate. That's just got to be a much more simpler thing. And that $250,000 that the representative mentioned is just, I can't say that it's wrong because I know it's right. It's just not what it should cost to do a fee change in a project like this. And it is what it is today, which is one of the reasons, and you mentioned that we want to make sure we freeze this. So what we were asking you, and I will say a little more since Representative Elkin brought it up, is that we really need to scale back our ambitions with changing the policy, except to simplify it for next year's session. We'd like to see things stay pretty much as it is so we don't have to do the work in MNLARS. And that will cause us a one session hiatus, if you will, from that. The less we have to do to change, the better, so we don't have to shell out more for MNLARS. But clearly, if you did something in the interim, we'd have to make MNLARS work on that, and that would defeat the point of the freeze at 1.16 with the fee changes as part of it.
Yeah, just a follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Representative Elkins.
We produced in this work session last week a list of things that we could do to simplify the process and minimize the investments we have to make. So the prime example is things like specialty plates. If a new specialty plate is implemented with the existing fee structure, it's basically the $25,000 for testing. If it's a new fee structure, it's $100,000. We probably don't want to spend $100,000 implementing a new fee structure for a plate. Really simple thing was there's a limitation in the interface between MNLARS and SWIFT, the state's accounting system, that only allows it to MNLARS to transmit whole numbers of whole dollars to SWIFT. And so I'm the author of the Deputy Registrar's fee increase bill, and they were proposing a $2.50 increase to $8.50 and $13.50. We might want to just round those off to $9 and $13 to avoid a whole bunch of programming. So we've got a list of these kinds of things that we produce that we can share with the whole committee, but I think we will want to do as many of these things as we can in order to minimize the investment that we're making in MNLARS during this interim period. But it is important that we resolve the funding issue quickly because speaking with Joan Redwing, the architect there, as soon as the announcement was made, they started bleeding staff immediately. So we need to understand, get to what is the base level of staffing that she needs for this while we're in maintenance mode, and make sure that we're providing enough funding that she's able to keep enough people to keep the lights on.
Any response, Mr. King? Otherwise, I'll go to the next.
Mr. Chair, just briefly, that we did discuss the sustaining staff with MN.IT and with DPS, and we believe that's included in the package. It will not cover if we escalate the number of specialty plates and the other things that we could be ambitious about, which we're hoping to curtail the ambition.
Thank you, Mr. King. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. King. Most of my questions have already been answered, but I'm going to be brief because it was regarding customization. Because you mentioned 10 states are in the process of using an outside vendor. We tried that, I don't know what year it was, but it failed. So it seems like we're feeling better that the risks are minimized because there's at least 10 other states that are in process, which is good. But the customization still worries me because that's how we ended up where we are now. So part of my question was, who is doing the customization? Would it be the vendor, MN.IT, DPS? You mentioned in your opening remarks that DPS will be owning it. So are they going to be doing the customization if there is need to do so with support from MN.IT and the vendor? I just want to be clear how that would work because the bill doesn't address that. And the other piece is, again, on language of the bill, you mentioned stakeholders throughout some portions of the bill, including stakeholder input on section 35 and in other areas. Who are those stakeholders? We know who they are because we've been hearing from them, but the legislation doesn't talk about them. Can we at least define at minimum what those, who they are, just to be clear? And those are basically my questions, but I do believe there will be some level of customization. It'd be great just to grab it off the shelf and implement and move on, but that's not the reality. So who's going to be in charge of doing that? Will that be vetted through the commissioner, the steering committee? We're not asking for you to come back because it looks like the steering committee does have representation from the legislature, but it's just to be crystal clear that we're not going to have the commissioner back in front of us, you know, on the spot of why these decisions were made without our input.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, to go to the question of who would do the customization, keep in mind that when we talk about procurement here of this package software solution, what we are doing is licensing the software from this vendor. We never own it, and we would not customize it. We would make requests of the vendor to do that. And hopefully, if the vendor hears the kinds of questions we might have, that would be of some value to somebody else, or the vendor could provide to us a like way to do it without the customization. So I can't ever say that, you know, we shouldn't allow it because we have to be logical, but that should be the last resort after everybody's arm wrestled to the ground. the point of the recommendation of that would come from the DPS commissioner with the minute commissioner along the side saying that we have seen the need for customization, and then that would be reported to the oversight committee, which has the legislative members on it, so that we're trying to vet that out and minimize that to the greatest extent possible. My belief is that other than interfaces with other systems, which are a standard part of doing kind of software, we should be able to implement this without customizing. Time will tell, but when we do it, it will be done by the vendor that has been chosen. And in actuality, while we may pay for it, they'll own it.
Mr. Chair, and just the follow-up on the
Franzen?
stakeholder
Sure.
definition.
The
Senator
stakeholder,
Franzen?
sorry. I can cover it.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, the stakeholder, we didn't go extensively through the list, but I did in my remarks comment on the number of stakeholders, including the deputy registrars, the people that are working the front lines in the back office at DVS, the people that are in the various associations that title, salvage, work with anything to do with vehicle titles. So I think we have a pretty extensive list, but I'm not going to say it's overly extensive. But our term stakeholder in the A5 means all of them and anybody that we might have mistakenly left out, so they're part of the game.
Okay. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. King, for you and your committee and for the due diligence you did in putting this committee report together. My question refers back to earlier in your presentation in which you said that you believe there was a potential and an increased risk of maintaining MNLARS and moving forward with it versus a packaged program. Could you give us or expound upon some of those risks and what those costs might be?
Mr. King.
Mr. Chair and Representative, happy to do that. One of the interesting things that was certainly a challenge, I think, for the state is most of the people that worked on the MNLARS programming and testing were contractors. So at one point, the state had a great number of contractors that it secured these programmers and testers through. Ms. Redwing did a great job of consolidating that to, I think, 2 vendors at the end of time, where those 2 vendors would supply all of those resources. But those resources are out in the market. They are on contract. So they could come and go. And we viewed that as a risk. The second part of that risk is that most of those people, until they worked on MNLARS, had no experience or knowledge of working on a motor vehicle registration system, or for that matter, a driver's license system. And the subject matter expertise to do such things is not a wide skill. Let's face it. It's in and among some of the states, the individuals that are actually operating those systems in various states, plus certain vendors that have chosen to be in that business. And to try to maintain that on your own through a contracting service, or even through hiring those people in as full-time state employees, is very difficult compared to the notion of going to a company where that is one of their major lines of business, where the people that did your implementation maybe worked on a driver's license or a vehicle implementation in another state, or maybe your own state if you were doing one or the other. So we viewed the risk going forward of having that type of talent continuing and available over time to be fairly significant. The other aspect of it was even discussed with some of the fees that were going on. It's clear to me and clear to us as we looked at it that the cost of adding a certain specialty plate or adding self-service features to the software going forward was way more costly than it should be when compared to looking at a package solution where the self-service aspects of it are already there. And when you look at the future and you think about self-service, and part of MNLARS today has self-service. You can renew your tabs over the internet. Maybe some of you do that. There's a convenience fee. odd name for it, to do it that way, and they get mailed to you. It's pretty efficient. That system today runs off the legacy system. So that's not actually even part of the MNLARS system. So you'd still have to build in that minimal self-service functionality to the system, whereas the third-party vendors already have self-service functionality built in. So that's what I meant by the idea of the word future-proof, is you're just thinking about what is going to be needed in the long term, and what's the best way to make sure you don't make decisions today that prevent you from taking advantage of something in the future. And frankly, we felt that in this particular area going forward, that the package software will protect us against these the future much better than this internally built MNLARS system. Think about it. If you're going to be in that market doing vehicle registration and titling, or doing driver's license, and that's part of your business, the main part of your business, you really need to keep innovating and stay current to be relevant in the market or be the leader in the market.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Mr. King, for all your work. I've appreciated getting to know you through this process, and I think you're doing a great job, so I want to say thank you at this time. Just a quick question. The surcharge of $225, do we know approximately how much per year that generates?
Mr. King.
Senator, I'm going to defer to one of the fiscal experts, if I may.
You may.
Ms. Boyd or Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee.
Mr. Chair, members, Andrew Lee from House Fiscal Staff. The surcharge at the 225 rate would bring in to the Special Revenue Fund about $16.5 million in fiscal year 2020 and about $18 million in fiscal year 2021.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you. And then just also, again, so I think a lot of us out in our communities here don't spend any more money on this issue, MNLARS, Veterus, whatever you want, and the $20 million, as you stated, that's going to cost more, and I can defend that. I think what we're doing is we're spreading the risk over 12 states, or 11 or 12 or 13 and maybe more to grow in the future. I think this is, and I support it when I tell people that this is the way we can spread this risk out, so that in the long term, looking at the big picture, this saves us from being on our own little island of having our own software. So again, I just want to make sure that I state this here. That's why I support this. I think it's a great business investment because we are spreading that risk over the large amount of people. So that's all I want to say. I know a lot of people want to talk, so I'll limit it to that. So thank you again, Mr. King.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. Representative Tapke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, Mr. King, I want to echo what everyone else has said. Thank you very much to you and your team for all of your great work and getting this moving forward. I think that a package system is the right way to go, and I'm excited about bringing this out into, agreeing with Senator Jasinski as to how we can spread the risk across more folks. One thing that I'd like to talk with you about a little bit is the urgency of getting this done, and where we're at today and where we're going to go into the future. And so as we look at this plan, it has a $50 million general fund fiscal impact, which is a big thing. And as we look at where we're at today with this session, the House Transportation Bill and the Senate Transportation Bill have major gulf between it in revenue and in bringing in financing in order to handle transportation issues, and then even a larger gulf between the Senate and the House as a whole. And so as we look at this, I don't know how we get a $50 million piece put into this as we sit today without having some sort of global deal and bigger things happening. If this doesn't happen during this session and getting the money to fund this, and it gets put off 2 years or even 4 years kind of thing, if we focus on 2 years, what happens? Like, what happens in individuals being able to use the system? Would we still shut it down if it doesn't get funded, if there's not a funding negotiation and package put together for globally for the state of Minnesota? How does that work, and where would we see things moving?
Mr. King, it sounds like the question is, what happens if we don't do this? Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, good question. Let me start with the headline that I would want you to leave with. Please get it done. I do understand, and obviously among all the other things that you're wrestling with the big transportation budget among all the other budgets. So having, I'm not oblivious of where we are with all that. And it's a different pay grade than me to figure out some of those things. All I can tell you is the following. The state must have a vehicle titling and registration system. So your choices are twofold. If you do not pass the bill for the new system, you will be forced to pass a bill that is 20 million less for the old system. You will have to go back into development of MNLARS and keep that going until you have a time certain where you can look at this procurement activity again. What will change then is the MNLARS project. The risks will become evident. We won't be done, I think, in the 16 months that we've laid out for the package. I think we would have to try to retain some of the people that we have that understand how to operate that. And I've told you what I think the risks around that are. That would be, in my opinion, throwing good money after bad and continuing something that is, I think, acknowledged by everybody to be going the wrong direction. So, you know, I can't solve all of those problems for you. I can just tell you you're going to have a vehicle registration and titling system. If you don't pass the new one, it will be the old one. And so your choice is really spending the money on MNLARS or spending 20 million to start down the road to the new system with a much better future. And I know that still throws the fiscal issue at you. And I apologize for that. If I could solve that, I would do that too. But I think we've got the best recommendation for you, and I hope, Representative, that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That absolutely does. I just wanted to make sure that we had context around we have to have a fiscal solution for transportation and a budget in a whole, or else things like this become exceptionally problematic for the people of Minnesota. So thank you very much for that, Mr. King.
Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too want to thank Mr. King for the work that you've done, and also I guess I need to mention the team that you have there is extremely well qualified. Being that Thomson Reuters is in Eagan, I'm very proud to be the home of that company, but also with Delta Northwest. I know that one of the reasons for Delta to pick up Northwest was the software, the reservation software that Northwest had that was the best in the industry. I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic. But I have to say that there's a piece of me that, and talking on the elevator up here from the parking garage, I talked with another senator, and it talked about that feeling that the grass is greener. The grass is greener somewhere else. And I guess I need to have a little bit more confidence that we're getting something that we don't have today, that we're not compromising on the FABs, the features, advantages and benefits, and what technical, operational, and interface issues that we have today that this new system is going to solve. And then when we talked about the, let's say, the change orders, how many change orders will we have to face over the next couple of years to get this to where, we don't know if we're going for optimal, or are we going for this is good enough? So I would like to get a little bit of comfort language there from you if we're talking about a lot of changes to get what we really expect, what we expected from MNLARS and what we expect from the new system. So if you could look at that a little bit for me.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, thank you for the question. I wondered if you'd get the Eagan word in there or not. Thank you. I think a couple of things that I would point out. First, we have an example in our own state of the activity of a packaged software company coming in under an extremely tight time frame to implement a system, albeit a driver system, not a vehicle system, in a very tight time frame, and that has gone remarkably well. So I just would say that we were forced by time and by federal law to actually do something that turned out to be the right thing, because we felt like we didn't have a choice. But it was actually, even with more time, quite possibly the right thing to make that choice, and it's worked out well. And I think, irrespective of the company, that's the type of activity I would expect around any third-party packaged software solution that we would select. An example, I don't think we're going to have customization to the extent that you're worried about, and I understand why you would be worried about it, and that goes to several of the other questions here as well. What we'll see are some things that are more standard. Something called an API, or application programming interface, which connects the core system with other types of systems, are much more refined in this packaged software than the ones that we would have to still build in the MNLARS product. It's a standard way, as you know, Senator, that industry connects to disparate systems to be able to send data back and forth. A good example to bring that to life is an electronic vehicle titling system. And you might recall that we used to use a particular system in our state, and during the MNLARS process, there was a procurement for yet another vendor that was going to be implemented along with the MNLARS software to provide this electronic vehicle titling system. We actually disagree with the selection of any of those systems. We believe that all the motor vehicle dealers could pick whatever system they want, and that you want your core package to publish the API or the connection to it to allow any of these other third-party electronic vehicle titling systems to connect. And you don't have to pick, the state doesn't have to pick one of those. Previously, we picked it, we implemented connecting it kind of hard, and we said everybody's got to use it. And some dealers didn't like the one we picked. And one of the complaints the dealers had was, why didn't you pick the one that's dominant in the market, or we use this one, or our entire system in our dealership is keyed to using a certain one, and why do you care which one we use as long as it does the activity? And the answer is, we shouldn't care. And the way we don't care is we use this kind of packaged software that we're proposing the state get, and that would use APIs or programming interfaces to connect to these other types of systems that make it easier. And that's not customization, because that's the way they connect to systems in other states as well. The final grass is greener thing, of course, here we are on the 14th, grass is just starting to get green around here, so it's a kind of a late start. But I would say that the best thing I can tell you is the customers in the other states that we talked to that had some of the same concerns before they did this. Some of them had their own MNLARS stories, others had their stories of HP or whoever it was, are happy and satisfied with what they've got. And they would tell us the grass is greener. So we think it's green because they're telling us it's green.
Representative Torkelson. And members, I'm now watching the clock. I'm going to limit one question because we have got a list of members who do want to ask questions that I'm afraid we're not going to get to. So just please keep that in mind. Both the House and the Senate are going on the floor at 10 o'clock. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have to abbreviate my list significantly. But first, I will share my thanks to you and your team, Mr. King. But I'd also like to give a shout out to the governor. Frankly, a number of us have been asking for this sort of activity for a long time, that we actually go out and make a serious evaluation of the availability of vendor-provided software. It's taken too long to get to this point. That's not your fault, of course, but I do thank you and the governor for moving this process forward. We wouldn't be here today if the administration hadn't actually got the ball rolling finally on evaluating the availability and effectiveness of vendor-provided software. That's very important. I'm going to have to pick from my list of questions here, and I'll do some of these others offline. I think I'm going to focus a little bit on the situation with our deputy registrars. We will be continuing to utilize MNLARS for the next 16 or so months. During those 16 months, our deputy registrars will continue to use workarounds, continue to work with a clunky system, for lack of a better term, and then near the end of those 16 months, they will have to go through another training exercise to get trained up for the new system. What are you recommending within this bill that will help them with their revenue needs to do all this extra work? And remember that they've been working for 2 years with this clunky system, spending extra time on every transaction. And I'm curious if you are giving us some recommendation on how we address that very serious problem.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Torkelson. One of the things that we are doing and recommending for the deputy registrars, who I think you characterized correctly, having to do a lot more work, is to make sure that they have more efficient processes to escalate the kind of problems they have and get resolution faster. So I think that the DPS staff that we've recommended will be at the right levels to be able to process their emails, their questions, and work through the more complex transactions for them. I think we saw effectively that they were doing quite well with the routine transactions. Most of the complaints were about things in the past and the extra work that they were given. And I'd like to maybe make a statement about that, because I think that's part of your point. When MNLARS was introduced, and this will also be true when the package software is rolled out, the deputy registrars do far more data entry than they did previously. So when we say more work, it's not just the system problems that cause the more work, which would ultimately go away, but it's actually putting more of the work into the field. That was part of the design, but I'm not sure that everybody was properly in recognition of that, and it would be appropriate to give some consideration, and I think that is in the broader transportation discussion, for increasing the deputy registrar fees. It is not addressed in this particular bill, but it is, I believe, in the other transportation bill, but I may be going beyond my knowledge there. I'll simply say that we recognize they're doing more work. I think that should be addressed, and it would be addressed by whatever percent off those fees goes on. Knowing that with a package solution, they're going to continue to do that kind of work. I will say that the package solution also has some new technologies that the deputy registrars are going to be very excited about. At the same time, they will be doing more scanning there. They'll be able to do scanning, and what they want to do, it sounds like they want more work, but they will be more accurate with doing scanning in their offices, and the package software solution will allow that to happen, much like it does today with the package software solution with the driver's license. So I think there's some innovation there that will save them time and accuracy. It will still keep a lot of the work on their end. So I do believe that addressing that fee structure in some manner would be appropriate at the right time.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me add my voice to those who are thanking you, Mr. King, and your team. And I don't have a lot of detailed questions because I really appreciate how you were highly collaborative with all of us and the agency in developing this, and I got to be a part of that conversation. And I think this is a very good package, which I support. I wanted to just highlight one thing quickly before I ask my question, and that is you had helped us understand something at the outset of revealing, of sharing this recommendation, which I had asked about, which was helping us understand that 12 or so years ago when we embarked on the MNLARS project endeavor, in which I was reflecting on having asked the agency every which way I could think of, why aren't we just buying a package? We can't be the only state that has vehicle titling and driver's licensing. And the answer that kept coming back from the agency was there really isn't much of that out there. And, we have highly specialized laws and requirements and demands, et cetera. And we do need to kind of build something from scratch. And you validated that at that time. There really wasn't much, but now the market is much more mature, it's robust and competitive. So to mitigate the future risk, embarking on this proposal is well advised. So thank you for that. That way we don't have to keep beating ourselves up for having made a mistaken decision. My question, I don't want to belabor this. I just want to maybe make a request of you to understand better the staffing recommendation coming in at about half of what the agency was looking at. Not that I doubt your recommendation, I just want to understand it better because I want to be sure we don't make a mistake there. Not that I'm suggesting you're leading us down the path of making a mistake, but given that those recommendations came about as a function of fairly intensive improvement analysis, that we've seen some improvement in the call times at the PIC Center, and we've seen some improvement in some types of titling turnaround. But when we went over to the FAST driver's license system, we saw some increase, even though that's a packaged software, some increase in turnaround times, and some of the more complex inquiries actually are taking longer. The easier inquiries and answers are speeding up, creating, kind of masking some of the increases in turnarounds and response times, et cetera. I don't think we're going to change the staffing recommendation. I just want to be confident of the funding and the staffing that we're going to be providing authorization for in this bill as it proceeds.
Mr. King.
Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, thank you. Let me just quickly give you a list of, again, the staffing, and I appreciate the question. So I'll go into a little more detail than I did before. There are two areas, only two, that we suggested after the implementation would stream down. So we took the DPS numbers, we reviewed them extensively in each category, and then we made the recommendation to reduce in two areas. The two areas we reduced in after the implementation plus 6 months was we reduced from 39 to 20 the number of people in title and registration issuing, and we reduced from 65 to 35 the number of people in the public information center. The reason we did those two areas was those two areas primarily are impacted by the implementation of a new system. And once that new system is implemented, where we had that 6 month extra, we saw those volumes to be returning to normal. So during the period, let's say from the beginning of next week through the implementation period, we felt the full staffing complement suggested by DPS was required, but we felt it would be a reduced demand once we reached the 6 month time after the implementation. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to see that down to the individual person. Are we 10 off this way or the other way? Time will tell, but I think they have sufficient to do a good job with keeping the statistics proper. On the other hand, there were, as I said, there were other areas. There were 187 people totally asked for. So when we subtract what we said after the implementation period, we get to 139. So people in financial oversight and auditing, data practice compliance, refund issuing, dealer and vehicle inspections, regional-based deputy liaisons, disability parking certificate processing, IRP and IFTA fuel tax auditing. We left those the same because we viewed those as necessary. They were not at the right staffing level. In the driver's area, There were driver service data verification people left in, driver's license issuing staff people, driver compliance support, and exam station support. I'm sure you probably heard how long it takes for the exams to be scheduled. When we looked at those areas, we felt those needs were addressed and they wouldn't go away. None of those areas would go away or change after the implementation of a new system. They exhibit pretty constant demand. So we think we addressed the staffing where it would go down after the implementation of a new system, and we left as is the places that the demand has been pretty constant. So overall, I think that's a good staffing package for DPS.
Members, my apologies to those who we were unable to get to, but we are unfortunately out of time. I wish we had more time because I know we've got members who wanted to ask questions. Any member of either the House or Senate wants to get a question to me, I will do my best to get an answer to your question. But at this stage, it's the only thing I have left. I'll go to Chair Hornstein. Any final words before we adjourn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. King. And I just appreciate the members' involvement and engagement in this. You know, the transportation committees on both sides are the committees of origin for anything related to this topic. So it's really important that we stay engaged and active in this. And so we have bipartisan legislation in the House. It's 2881, and in the Senate, it's Senate File 2882. And I hope that the members can look at the bill, continue to give us your thoughts and your advice. We don't have a lot of time, but we want to get it right. And I think, Mr. King, you have really helped us immensely in that regard. And I echo, actually, also what Representative Torkelson said about the governor's office and the governor's engagement in this. So we have a few more days, and I think thank you, Mr. Chair, because this was a good start in getting this out in the public, and of course the agencies we want to continue to engage with as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, in conclusion, I would echo what Chair Hornstein said regarding Governor Walz, and I'm very thankful that he engaged in this conversation back in March, and it is through his efforts and appointing Mr. King and his team that has gotten us to this point. So I'm very grateful to Governor Walz for that. I would encourage members to think very hard and long about what we are trying to do here and what our realistic alternative is, which I find frankly quite unpleasant. Mr. King, Ms. Albus, thank you very much for coming here today. We have taken a great deal of your time over the last couple of months, but I want you to know that the state of Minnesota is very grateful for all that you have done for us. So thank you very much. Members, with that, we are adjourned.
come to order. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I impose the call of the Senate.
The Senate is under call.
Mr. President,
Senator Gazelka.
I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant of Arms be instructed to bring in the absentee members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the Sergeant at Arms will bring in the absent members. Members, please stand for the prayer. Today's chaplain is Reverend Carol Tomer from Pilgrim Lutheran Church in St. Paul. And following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. Holy One, we gather ourselves in these moments for a holy pause to behold the holy work you give us to do. This session's end is coming soon, and with it, unfolding futures of many sorts. The fullness of days and hearts can sometimes obscure the long view. This is why we pause, Holy One, because we need wisdom to focus on the future for which we hope, to see the future for which you hope, amidst the details and deliberations of these days. Give us hearts and souls and minds filled with your compassion and love for your whole creation and for every single person, all of us made in your holy image. Compassion and love shape our common ground, the ground you give us and the horizon we give to generations yet to come. In our communities of many faiths and diverse perspectives, might we ask for wisdom in this way? What would your Spirit at work in the universe have us do? And so we pause in prayer, together, now, seeking your wisdom in our work. And in this pause and in each hour and day of this session still unfolding, soon concluding, continue to guide each senator and Senate staff member here. Give them courage and vision that they may not lag in hope or collaboration, but that they may be strong and humble in building a more perfect union. Thank you for these servant leaders. Guide them in making the imperfect decisions that love and compassion require, the strength to bear well the consequences of doing so, and the deep knowing that we are so thankful for them, they who immerse themselves in this holy work, in this Senate, for this state, for your earth, for our common life, with gratitude to you for our very lives. Amen.
The Secretary will take the roll.
Senators Abler, Anderson B., Anderson P., Bach, Benson, Bigham, Carlson, Chamberlain, Champion, Clausen, Cohen, Swazinski, Dames, Dibble, Draheim, Dietzick, Eaton, Eichhorn, Franzen, Friends, Gazelka, Goggin, Hall, Herr, Hayden, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Ingebrigtsen, Isaacson, Jasinski, Jensen, Johnson, Kent, Kiffmeyer, Klein, Coran, Lane, Lang, Latz, Limmer, Little, Marty, Matthews, Miller, Nelson, Newman, Newton, Osmic, Pappas, Pratt, Rarick, Ralph, Rest, Rosen, Rude, Senjum, Simonson, Sparks, Tomasoni, Torres, Ray, Utke, Weber, Westrom, Uyghur, Wickland.
A quorum is present. Members will begin on the agenda today with the third order of business, messages from the House. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following Senate file as amended by the House, in which the amendments to the concurrence of the Senate is respectfully requested. Senate file number 326, a bill for an act relating to health. Senate file number 326 is herewith returned to the Senate. Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move that we lay over Senate File 326.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. The Secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following House files herewith transmitted. House file numbers 2097 and 2515. Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
There's no action required on that message. Moving to the fourth order of business, first reading of House bills. The House files listed in the agenda will be given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the fifth order of business, reports of committees. Senator Gazelka. Senator Gazelka, reports of committees.
Mr. President, I move the committee reports printed in the addenda be adopted.
On the adoption of the committee reports, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Moving to the seventh order of business, second reading of House bills. The Secretary will read the House file numbers.
House file numbers 810, 1262, 2697, and 2849.
Second reading. Moving to the eighth order of business, introduction and first reading of Senate files. Listed in the introduction calendars are Senate file numbers 2883 through 2885. These Senate files are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the ninth order of business, motions and resolutions. We have a few authors' motions listed in the agenda. We'll take these authors' motions as one motion. All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Continuing under motions and resolutions, the Secretary will read Senate Resolution number 101.
Senators Gazelka and Bach introduced Senate Resolution number 101, a Senate resolution relating to the establishment of the Select Committee on Home Ownership, Affordability, and Availability.
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move that Senate Resolution number 101 be adopted.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I am going to move that we have a recess to the call of the President until somewhere around 1 o'clock, but I know that we want members to stick around after we recess for some important information.
All right, on the motion to recess to the call of the President, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. The Senate is in recess. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, we have a special guest in the House, former Senator Roger Reinhardt. And I just want to tell you that he's a good friend. Relationships across the aisle are very, very important in this place. And Roger was one of those guys that figured out how to get things done. He looked to the possible and was a very effective legislator. But as you all know, he's been serving overseas. Roger looks like he lost a little weight. But I am so glad he's back, and I want you to give him a hand.
Senator Reinhardt, I know many of us in the chamber had the opportunity to serve with you, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone who had the opportunity to serve that we're all very proud of what you've accomplished on behalf of our country, but more importantly, we're very proud to call you a good friend. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your service to our state and to the United States of America. Members, anyone else want to share any comments? Okay, that completes our work for now. Thank you, members.
Senate caucus will be up in our special room.